Hello, I'm Clint Dawson, the chair of the Department of Aerospace Engineering and Engineering Mechanics here at UT Austin. Thank you for coming out on this cold and wet afternoon. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Tom Markusic, the founder of Firefly Aerospace, to speak with us this afternoon. Thanks to all of you who are attending in person and virtually. It was wonderful to see many of you here with us earlier this month when we hosted the official unveiling of our new Launch Texas program. This new and unique program offers a space tech graduate specialization for master's and doctoral students comprised of topics in aerospace tech. It also provides students with the crucial entrepreneurial education needed to start their own space tech companies. As part of the program, we are inviting entrepreneurial speakers like Tom to speak with our students about their experiences. Tom, who's been a longtime friend of the department and a valuable member of our external advisory committee, has helped keep us connected to the greater Austin space tech community. In fact, he was involved with some of our earliest Launch Texas discussions. Tom has also been a wonderful resource for our Texas Rocket Engineering Lab, serving as a mentor and philanthropic partner through his company's nonprofit Firefly Academy. And many of our students have participated in internships and gone on to work at Firefly after graduation. We're very grateful for your ongoing support of our community, Tom. Today, Tom is here to talk about new space and the current state of the industry. He will also discuss entrepreneurship, how it is specific to new space, and share his vision of the future, highlighting the importance of relationships in high-tech entrepreneurship. Before I turn it over to Tom, there are a few important things to know. Tom holds a PhD in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Princeton and is an American rocket scientist and space tech entrepreneur. He has a broad background in the space industry. Tom worked as a propulsion research scientist and in constellation subsystem program management at the US Air Force and NASA. He also served in senior positions at several emerging space tech companies, including SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Virgin Galactic. Most recently, Tom founded Firefly Aerospace, where he led the company in the development of the Alpha launch vehicle and the Blue Ghost lunar lander. This development has been supported through fundraising, approximately $300 million, with a Series A valuation exceeding $1 billion. Tom, we're all looking forward to your talk today, so now I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I'll be testing. It's all working well. Great to be back here. Rainy, cloudy day here in Texas, unusual, but being someone from Northeast Ohio, it's actually comfortable and familiar, so I don't mind it at all. So today I'm going to talk about this subject that's obviously very near and dear to my heart, space exploration, space transportation, but also the intersection of that with big business. And that ties into this subject that we call new space. And so what I'm going to do in this talk is I'm going to make sure everybody understands what new space is, where it came from, try to understand unique attributes of entrepreneurialism and new space. And then finally, I'm going to give you what, in my opinion, is where we should ultimately be going with this. As the title suggests, there's kind of a double-edged sword in this business, and really in being an entrepreneur in general. It's very exciting. There's a lot of rewards, there's a lot of promise for it, but there's also a lot of peril. And in my field, you can literally be playing with fire. And again, the double entendre that we're out firing rocket engines every day, but it's really risky business. And you can figuratively get burned in it as well. So midway through this presentation, I'm going to give you some sort of intimate and maybe even embarrassing insight, just so you can really get a feel of what it's like trying to build companies like this, some of the pitfalls that you'll experience, and then some of the glorious triumphs that you'll experience along the way as well. So, all right. First, so here's the overall outline. First, we'll dig into new space, as I said, then we'll talk about entrepreneurship, and then what I view as the next steps, or I'm calling new space 2.0. So first of all, new space. What is new space? New space, as I would define it, is it's a movement to subvert the dominant paradigm of space exploration and space economic development. So let's unpack that a little bit. So it's a movement. It's not just one company. It's not just SpaceX or Blue Origin or Firefly. It's a whole group of companies, and not just companies, it's extended academic institutions, government institutions, all working in concert to try to change the way things were done. The way things were done in the past is that space was really dominated by big aerospace companies and big governments. But a big dramatic change came when individuals got together, individuals that had a lot of money, and were able to gather a bunch of smart people around them and actually go out and go to space independent of big companies or big government. So that's been a major change. And the aim of it ultimately was to lower the cost and increase the frequency of access to space, to democratize space, to make space accessible ultimately to everyone would be kind of one of the overarching goals. It is a very 21st century and very American thing. It started here, it's starting to spread worldwide. But really what happened in the dot-com era and happened with dot-com companies really provided sort of the seed funding that was able to get this off the ground. And that's probably a big reason it started here. And there's just naturally a lot of risk takers in this country. But then there's also a really strong aerospace background in this country that could be leveraged to build these companies as well. So I said it's private, entrepreneurial. Government's been involved, but very much in a support role. And initially, the government laughed about this kind of stuff. And now it's come full circle to where the government really embraces it and is really supportive. I'll just give you a little anecdotal stories along the way. And one of them was in my early days at SpaceX, we called the Dragon spacecraft, was actually called Magic Dragon. And the reason that is because when Elon was walking through the halls of Congress talking about building a capsule that could go to space station, replace the space shuttle, someone was like in the hallway, like humming Puff the Magic Dragon because it was such a fantasy. It was such a joke. But Elon was like, okay, fine, we'll call it Magic Dragon. And I actually have the original t-shirts that say Magic Dragon, not Dragon on it. But they're not laughing anymore, are they? It's because the Dragon has really become the default and really only way to get to space station now. So it's pretty cool that it's come full circle. And I can tell you in the government, there's no resentment. Everybody feels like this is an American effort and we're all very supportive of each other. And we try to use the best aspects of all of the institutions that are involved to help this grow. Having said that, I think there is room for this to grow internationally, and I'm excited to see that happen. So this is another image I think that just emphasizes, how American this is. So here's a Tesla Roadster in space that flew aboard the first flight of Falcon Heavy. I actually drove that car, which is kind of cool to think a car I drove is now like orbiting the sun. But I remember, I think I was in Europe when this actually launched, and one of my German friends was very logical. He's like, what is the purpose of launching a Tesla, into space? It has no scientific purpose. And I was like, it's because what Americans do, we do it because we can. And it shows that if we can do that, we can pretty much do anything we damn well want to put our minds to. So let's go back and just make sure everybody's calibrated on how this all came to pass. SpaceX really represents the genesis of new space. There were folks in the 90s that thought about doing this and tried to get things going, but it really wasn't until that engine of the dot-com era started producing hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars in the hands of basically a bunch of technology nerds who thought, okay, what can I do next with it? Elon was definitely one of those. He wanted to do something on Mars, and he wanted to work with NASA. And after looking at that, he didn't think they were going to get there in his lifetime. And he tried to work with Russians, and he didn't think they were going to be much help. So he just said, okay, I'll do it myself. So he gathered around some smart folks with him and started this company, SpaceX, again, which was, the early days of it, it was just a real cluster, I can tell you. There were lots of tripping over ourselves. I was fortunate enough to be one of the early employees there. I was there for the first launch of the first Falcon 1 out on Kwajalein Atoll, which is this jungle island out in the absolute middle of nowhere. You could fly to Hawaii, and then you fly like 2,000 miles out into the middle of nowhere. just really wild, right on a jungle island, Elon Musk, rockets, fishing, drinking, launching rockets. I mean, it was just a really wild experience. And at the time I had been at NASA, and this whole thing was like literally, well, it was literally intoxicating, but emotionally and mentally it was intoxicating as well. It was like, wow, this is the birth of something totally new. And the thing that really got me, I can tell you, is when we launched Alpha, it went up a mile and it came straight back down and crashed into the ground and exploded. And I think most people were like, oh yeah, I pretty much expected that. But Elon, I very much remember Elon was like pale white and just like ran out of the room, ran for the bathroom. I'm pretty sure he got physically ill in there after this happened. And I was like, wow, this guy actually thought that we were going to space today. And I never quite met someone like that where it's beyond belief. Their brain had just programmed the neural networks to believe we're actually going to do this today. And I just thought, you know, if I get behind this guy, I know he's never going to give up. We're going to keep doing this until we get there. So that's when I jumped and became an early SpaceX employee. So ultimately, it took us 4 launches to get there. Elon was down to nothing, basically his house. You know, he spent all of his personal wealth on this, was borrowing money. I mean, talk about passion, talking about being all in. And we got the 4th launch off. And then within a few weeks later, we got a contract for Falcon 9 to go to station. And really sort of the rest is history. And that was the ignition moment for New Space. So that really got everything going. There were also some contemporary parallel companies like Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, Stratolaunch that were going on. And at the end of my tenure at SpaceX, I said, okay, this New Space is real. It should not just be about one company. It should be about a movement, as I said earlier. So I actually worked for all these companies, trying to help them figure out how to become the next New Space company. But what I realized is that they didn't have some of the fundamentals in those companies that would allow them to become comparable to SpaceX. And that ultimately led me to start my own company, Firefly, because I thought I could create a company that truly was aligned with the way that we did things at SpaceX. And proud to say that we moved a long way along those directions, and only our 2nd flight, we got to orbit with a rocket that's much more capable than the Falcon 1. And we're working on a Falcon 9 class rocket as well. And I'll talk more about that as we move along. But the cool thing about SpaceX and these other companies is that it launched 2nd generation companies. So just like people that came out of Alta Vista and some of these early web companies, you know, you got Googles and Facebooks and those folks that came out that were kind of like 2nd generation e-commerce companies. Now we're seeing a whole bunch of 2nd generation New Space companies coming. My company, Firefly, is one of those. You've heard of Relativity, Rocket Lab. There are a bunch of satellites coming out. So not only what we did at SpaceX is cool and what Elon did is cool, but it's really grown into something much bigger, and it's going to create all kinds of new opportunity and new capabilities. So very exciting time we live in. Being students now, you guys have no idea how lucky you are. In the 80s and 90s, you know, when I was a student, you know, you could go work for NASA or, you know, Boeing, and it was cool and interesting and everything, but this is a whole different animal. We're talking about, you're gonna go work somewhere where you're just gonna go to Mars without those guys. You're gonna figure it out. People are gonna be making billions of dollars. So all the, you know, rich and famous are all around you, and while you're working in the rocket factory, oh, there's another little company starting up that's going to build electric cars called Tesla. Oh, that'll be interesting. We'll see where that goes. So it's just this incredibly dynamic environment with all kinds of cool things going on. So there'll be all kinds of opportunities for you out there. So exciting time to be alive for you folks. Let me grab my phone so that I don't get crazy on time. I can talk too long. All right. 4:16. Okay, so one thing I want to emphasize is New Space is not just about rockets. Rockets are important, but there's a whole evolution of things going on beyond just rockets, including the capabilities that are deployed in space that can do ultimately the things that generate money, the satellites and such. So in this chart, I outline what I've seen is the evolution from like the 2020 to 2000 to 2010 was that small launch vehicle, Falcon 1. That led us to build the Falcon 9 class vehicle. And that led about 5 years later into reusable vehicles and even larger vehicles. And the advent of companies that were building next generation small launchers. Firefly would be one of the companies that started in this time frame that was able to build a next generation small launcher. In this 5 years that we're in right now, we're going to see the advent of super heavy launchers like Starship and New Glenn. And we'll see a next generation of large launchers that are comparable to a Falcon 9, but better in some ways. So Firefly is working very hard in cooperation with Northrop Grumman right now to build a next gen medium to large launcher called Beta. And then when we look beyond 2025, some of the cool things that are going on are new space stations. One of our investors in Firefly, who's a billionaire, is building his own space station, his own private space station. So this is like James Bond's Goldfinger stuff or something, but that's going to be happening in the next several years. Elon is going to the moon and to Mars. What I saw back in 2006 on that remote jungle island convinced me that this guy's not going to give up until people are on Mars. So we're going to see that in his lifetime. Elon and I are about the same age, so I'm starting to feel it, and I know he is too. So the urgency, I'm sure, is there to get there. You know, something like the next 10, 15, 20 years. On the launch vehicle side, in the future, I have a vision of the future that's a little bit different than a lot of the folks out there, that almost all the folks. I really believe that high-speed aircraft are the way to go to space, and that the days of vertical launch rockets are going to be numbered. And I'll get into this in the end, but I don't think building bigger and bigger conventional rockets is the way to go. I'm really excited about hypersonics, air-breathing propulsion, takeoff and landing from runways, turning this into a very aircraft-like operation environment. I'll say more about that later. But in parallel to all this, there are small satellite companies coming out that are creating more and more opportunities. The reason I started Firefly is because I just saw so much activity in this small launch vehicle area that they needed a dedicated capability with a small launcher. So that was really part of the genesis of Firefly. And those satellites and the constellations are just creating more and more capability that is going to drive the cost down and increase the services that we'll get from those small satellites. I think ultimately, beyond the constellations and lunar landers that are being developed, we're going to see space tugs, in-space servicing, and even some really interesting cislunar military activity is going to become a bigger thing as well. And then we have space tourism and point-to-point travel. So increasingly, people will want to go for rides to go up and see what space looks like, or go anywhere in the world, you know, and say in 45 minutes. There are those kinds of cool missions that people are looking at now and working on, but I think in the future we'll have even more interesting applications. So just to kind of wrap things up here, the promise of new space, you know, in the near term, we're going to extend the reach of humanity into the solar system. We're going to go to the moon and Mars. That's going to happen in the near term. Maybe more importantly, there's going to be massive economic activity and 21st century jobs associated with this. The estimates are multi-trillion-dollar space economy in the next couple decades. That'll make it really one of the biggest industries in the entire world. And, you know, ultimately, my dad was an auto worker, a blue-collar auto worker in Ohio. And one of the reasons I do what I do is to create opportunities for families to have great jobs. I think it's something that gives people dignity. I think it's if everybody's employed in something they love, that starts to make some of these racial divides and economic divides kind of wash away. I think prosperity is good for everyone, and I think it can be a very healing thing in societies. So it's one of my motivations, and it's one of the big things I think is a promise for New Space, is that it has the opportunity to bring a lot of prosperity around the world to individuals. Long term, this opens up the exploration of the, entire universe ultimately. And when you really sit back and start dreaming and staring at the stars in the dark, you realize that there are unlimited resources out there in the universe. And what would our existence look like if we had unlimited resources, if we could get people off of this planet so that we're not getting overcrowded and kind of overloading the room here and causing problems on our own planet, but unlimited water, fresh water, unlimited materials, unlimited energy. It's all out there. We just have to figure out how to get to it. And I think ultimately that'll have, again, a very unifying and positive effect on society and us as a species. Because we won't be crammed in the fish tank. We'll be out exploring together, creating new worlds. And people that don't like each other can each have their own planet. We're going to the red planet first. We got the blue planet already. Okay. Next up, I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship, about building a business. And a lot of the things I want to talk about are just general guidance. Some of you in here, you may not think space is cool and everything, but you have other interests. And I think there's just a lot of commonality in building businesses and my experience in building businesses that are applicable to how you may build any type of business. Keep an eye on time. All right, so again, I like starting with definitions. So my simple definition for entrepreneurship would be the creation of transformative businesses. That means businesses that fundamentally create a new capability or a new thing that is generally useful and sort of advances our daily lives. And so some of the attributes of entrepreneurship and the companies that are associated with that, again, are the products that are completely new or better than the status quo. The businesses are often highly profitable or a big loss for early stakeholders. So there's a lot of risk involved for everyone. But at the end of the day, the entrepreneur himself or herself ultimately takes on a lot of risk, which means they may crash and burn. But if they're ultimately successful, they can reap huge rewards. And those rewards can be used and leveraged to go on and do other things. America is a land of opportunity, and there are a lot of entrepreneurs that started from nothing and have become kind of captains of the world. Me, for example, I grew up on a dirt road in Ohio, raising Arabian show horses, and neither my parents or my siblings even graduated from high school. So you said I got it in, I ended up having the good fortune of going all through and getting a PhD from Princeton and starting my own company that now is worth billions of dollars. I mean, that it was a lot of work, a lot of suffering, as you're going to see, but don't take it for granted. America is one of the few places in the world that this kind of dream can actually happen if you're willing to sign up for a lot of pain. One thing I do is I look around and I look at what other people have done that are trying to do things that I'm trying to do, not in space, but just trying to build businesses and try to look for commonalities between them. Because if you find patterns amongst, other people that have done these things, then those patterns are probably generally applicable to what you're trying to do, and you'd be really wise to pay attention. So here are some of the historical, great entrepreneurs of a century before that I've studied, and I've distilled what I call the 4 8s of these successful entrepreneurs: anticipate, innovate, create, and dominate. And I see these trends in what all of these guys did. So I'm curious as how many of you can identify who these folks are. I've asked this many times, and I won't bore you and do it, but one thing that's interesting is these guys are all money guys. John D. Rockefeller, Carnegie, JP Morgan. These guys are entrepreneurs too, but they also were very much involved in the development of their technology, Edison, Tesla, and Ford. And the thing that's interesting that I find is that everyone can identify these guys who aren't as rich as these guys, but almost no one can identify any of these guys. So it's kind of interesting and gratifying to me that if you're an entrepreneur that has a hand in the development of your technology, that really seems to go down in history and people really remember who you are, which may or may not be a goal in life, but I just find it interesting. So what about these 4 8s? So the first step is to see the future. It is to anticipate what people will need in the future, be able to see around the corner, see over the horizon. All these folks did this. The next part is, now that you have a vision of the future, come up with an innovative solution that's differentiated from anything that's out there now, that will allow you to uniquely be able to provide that future that you've envisioned in your mind. Then you have to roll up your sleeves to create part of it. You've got the vision, you've got the idea, and now you got to turn it into some physical reality. And this is a hard slog. This is getting money to build things. You're breaking things, begging for more money to build them again, and ultimately proving that they work. If you've done that, and you've done it quickly, before other people can catch up, then you will be in a dominant position. You will be able to exploit your first mover advantage, be the first to market, and then you work on defending that market position, reaping the benefits, and then deciding how to deploy those benefits, either to grow your enterprise or splinter off and start your Tesla or start your solar city or whatever your next thing might be. So all these folks did that. They did it very effectively. And it's something that I keep in mind in the company that I've built and anything we do at Firefly. And so just a few examples of like Dragon, how it followed this model. Elon anticipated that the shuttle wasn't going to be around forever and that he was going to come up with a solution. The innovative solution was to use the rockets that they already had and put a capsule on top of it and use modern materials and computers to create this Dragon capsule. Worked very hard doing that, and really part of the SpaceX model that really needs to permeate any new space company is this idea of vertical integration. If you want to control cost and schedule, you got to do it yourself, and that's indeed what was done on Dragon and pretty much everything at SpaceX and really everything at Firefly. And here we are today, dominating. Dragon is now the unequivocal leader in human spaceflight. So they did it all. And at Firefly, a little more modest example, but we're a startup company. I saw all the small satellites coming. I saw Elon and everybody's building these bigger rockets. There's going to be a need for a small launcher. So that was me anticipating the future. And what's happened in the last decade has proven that out. The small satellites are just growing and growing and growing in numbers, and these constellations are growing and growing. And there's huge demands for a small launcher. We could sell as many of our alpha rockets as we could build. Our problem right now is production. So what we did do that was innovative, we built a Falcon 1, but using more advanced materials. We built the world's largest all composite and simplest to higher performance rocket engines. We built a company from the ground up to go out and do it. And just last month, we flew in our flight 2, we achieved orbit, and now Alpha is the only operational 1 metric ton class commercial launcher in the world, and we have customers kind of lined up outside the door. All right, so next up, I'm going to show you a couple videos that really take you inside Firefly and inside the experience of growing a company. You're going to see a lot of this promise and peril that I've been alluding to here. The first video is actually a trailer for what will be an upcoming documentary. So there's been a UT grad in film school that's been following me around for really the last 5 years, kind of filming all the ups and downs of building this company. So it'll be a Netflix or a Peacock or something documentary at some point. So you're going to get to see kind of a preview of some of the things that are in that. And then the second second video is just a video of our flight 2. So let's see if this works. Just show you how much time I have in my life. Neglecting the other things in life. Let's see, this inspection is a little bit expired. It's only about 1.5 years.
The guy is a genius. And so I said, I'm in. What do you need from me?
When you first hear it, you swear the world was coming to an end or something.
As best I know, they are testing rocket engines for, I guess, for space or something.
NASA awarding 3 multi-million-dollar contracts to build a space rocket.
Beautiful blue sky there, isn't it?
Among those selected, Firefly Space Systems of Cedar Park, Texas.
While There are a lot of incredibly accomplished people. I'm not one of them.
It was kind of a surprise to everyone that we had a rocket company coming into a small community. In my way of thinking, he may be a little bit late on the draw. SpaceX is already dumping them off every 2 months.
I know one of the things that we heard is cat. This is not, be a lady, please. I know I heard one old rancher say that he hoped that whatever they were putting out there wasn't going to melt his cows.
Come on, baby. This is the latest experiment for me. He's not a businessman at all. He's an engineer.
Tom had his SpaceX stock options. He cashed them out. He bet everything.
So you are a true life rocket scientist.
Yes, ma'am. And now an entrepreneur.
I love it.
If Firefly is successful and they start getting rockets out, they could definitely be the next billion-dollar rocket company.
Well, what was the message?
We're completely fucked.
The space race is on with superpowers, billionaires.
So there's a lot of competition, and you're going to see winners and losers.
This is a new era.
He has one of the world's richest men really, really, really far up his ass right now.
We want to...
Tom was the vice president of propulsion for Virgin for 3 years.
The allegation that came was that Tom Markusic had actually taken some of the intellectual property that had been developed by Virgin to do some of the engineering work at Firefly.
Tom developed Virgin's IP. He doesn't need to steal anything from Virgin.
Being on the other side of a lawsuit against Richard Branson would definitely be a stressful experience. Even if you have done everything right, it might still cost millions of dollars to clear away those legal troubles.
We are going to have to do some internal layoffs of our full-time employees.
That's what you do in business. You try to wear people out financially and psychologically and emotionally and get rid of them so that you don't have competition.
You know, you want to be a world-class rocket company? Guess what? It's going to be friggin' hard. It's going to be painful.
Any error in judgment or operation, it all goes up.
Keep Fire-X on. Get everybody out from outside. Yeah, this thing can blow the window out of this glass, so stay away from me, please.
Breaking news, a scare at a Burnett County rocket launch site.
You know, when we started the company, we said, let's just go like hell, damn the consequences. I want to be successful fast or I want to fail fast. I'm sorry. I'm not going to say I tried as hard as I could. I'm going to continue to fight, but everyone should consider this the end of the road.
If you go, you go like hell.
When you're successful, all your friends are around you.
Don't look
and when you fail, you're by yourself.
and never tell.
The company went bankrupt, and yet Tom didn't give up.
They have gone through something that would have killed most businesses, and yet they've managed to pull out of these challenges, move forward.
I'm not gonna pretend that it's always easy, but he is a man who has vision.
It's the way the universe works. You want to do something amazing, it's going to kick your ass. It's going to make you earn it.
When you see someone who has his personal and family future on the line, I mean, you can't help but root for that.
I'm a stranger now.
It's very unlikely that we get to space. It's one of the hardest things in the world to do.
You're questioning whether we're really capable of doing this. We're launching this rocket, period.
$170 million in to get to this road trip.
The last 7.5 years have been continuous crisis.
Right now, the whole fucking field's on fire.
Unbelievable accomplishments.
Awesome, guys.
It's like an amusement park ride. It's just like scaring the hell out of you. You want to get off, but you don't want to get off.
10, 9,
8.
This is their first
7,
ever attempt
6,
at going to space. No
5,
private company's first rocket
4,
has ever made it to
3,
orbit on its first attempt.
2, 1. Liftoff time is 1:59.
A lot of people think today is the fulfillment of 7.5 years. Today is only the beginning.
And just yesterday from NASA, we got a $93.3 million contract to go to the moon.
T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. S1 engine ignition, MLO is high. Liftoff of Alpha Flight 2 on its mission to the blacks.
Bearings up.
Confirm stage 2 ignition and shutdown. Look at that view.
C1. Orbit achieved. Alpha is in the black.
All right. Well, hopefully that gives you a little more sense of the promise and peril of what we're doing. Lots of money, lots of hard work, lots of lawsuits, but you keep pressing ahead and things work out. So we're really blessed and fortunate to be where we are now with Firefly, and we're moving on to even bigger things. So just to wrap things up, again, I'd like to give you a view of where I think things should go next. So in New Space 1, we did establish this new paradigm of transferring space access to entrepreneurial commercial sector. But at the end of the day, we're still flying a bunch of rockets that look a lot like the 1950s. And in my view, I mean, it's great. What we've essentially been able to figure out how to do is to take those very expensive 1950s and 60s concepts and make them lower cost, which is a great achievement, but I don't think it's as transformative as ultimately we want things to be. You know, we've decreased the cost of access to space, maybe by 50%. I say modestly, that's not really that modest, but when you're really trying to change things, it's all about orders of magnitude, 10x type reductions. So I think New Space 2.0 should be about creating new technologies and applying those technologies to make space transportation even more efficient and, you know, ultimately driving the cost down by a factor of 10. And to do so, I think you need to go back and look at fundamentals. So as Heinlein said, once you're in Earth orbit, you're halfway to anywhere in the solar system. You know, so for example, it takes about 9.1 kilometers per second of change of velocity to get to orbit. But to escape Earth completely and really go anywhere in the universe might take a long time, but it takes a little over 13 kilometers per second. So it just shows you just getting to orbit, you've crossed a lot of that hill to go anywhere else in the solar system. So the problem is we're in this very, very strong gravity well, and that's why it takes so much energy just to get to Earth orbit, and that you're almost the rest of the way there. And the only way we know of is to use inefficient chemical fire-breathing rockets to get to space. until there's like some insane breakthrough in physics, we are going to be reliant on these impulse machines to get us to space. But that doesn't mean we have to use the same technology to go everywhere in space. And that's going to be one of the core theses of what I say here. Sorry, that's kind of blocked there. But what that says is, although we got to use rockets to get to space, space is very close. It's only 60 miles up, which, I mean, what's 60 miles? Waco or something? I mean, it's not that far away. So one of my big questions is, why do we use the same technology that we used just to get, that we would just need to use to get out of that little thin layer of atmosphere to not go 60 miles, but 60,000 miles or hundreds of thousands of miles out? Because there are technologies that we can use that are much more efficient and smarter to use once we get to space. So the solution, IMO, in my opinion, and there are lots of people have lots of ideas, and I'm just giving you my opinion. My opinion, it is to use smaller vehicles to get just to the edge of space and then pass the baton to much more efficient vehicles that can take us to those remote destinations. So just to illustrate this a little bit more, this is the way we do things now. We put a big heavy launch vehicle up into space, and we don't just put it up into that minimum orbit of around a couple hundred kilometers. We actually carry that payload all the way up to the final orbit, again, which can be thousands of miles away. We drop the payload off. Oh, and then the rest of that giant rocket just sits there as a big piece of space junk and debris, which one of your professors would identify as being a big problem. So it's not only inefficient, it's really messy. It just remains up there for a long time. So it's inefficient and expensive. And the approach that we see that's dominant today is to just build bigger and bigger and bigger versions of that. So Falcon 1s, going to Falcon 9s, going to Falcon Heavies, jumping up to Starships, and with some other cats like Blue Origin and SLS in here in between. So I would hold that's not the best way to approach the problem. And this is an illustration of how I suggest we approach the problem. So 2 steps. We use a space plane, single stage orbit, no dropping of propellant tanks or stuff in the ocean or anything. Single stage orbit, space plane takes off from a runway, goes just to the edge of space. In space, a reusable robot, a solar powered space tug is sitting there waiting to meet the space plane. The space trans tug rendezvous with the space plane. The space plane drops off the payload in that Earth orbit. The space tug grabs it and takes it up to its final destination. The space plane doesn't go up and just become a piece of space junk. 90 minutes later, after it took off, it goes over the east horizon and it comes back 90 minutes later over the west horizon and lands on the same runway that it took off from, and it's ready to be reloaded and go and do another mission. The space tug takes the payload to the final destination and deploys it, and then it comes back down to low Earth orbit again and awaits for the next cycle to happen. Everything here is very reusable. And if you look at like an Alpha mission, we charge $15 to $20 million for a typical Alpha. To do this mission with the same payload, I think we could do it for $1 million. So that gets us, down in those orders of magnitude that I'm talking about. So the cost impact is illustrated here. So say for Alpha to take a payload to 1,000-kilometer orbit, it's like $30,000 per kilogram. If you couple Alpha with a space tug and do that handoff that I was talking about, you can about cut that in half, which makes it comparable in cost to a medium lift launch vehicle. If you couple that medium lift launch vehicle with a space tug and do that low Earth orbit drop off, you can get a medium lift vehicle to be comparable in price to a heavy lift launch vehicle. And ultimately, if you deploy that space plane and do the space tug combo, you're going to be the lowest price in the game. And all these guys are going to be building these bigger and bigger rockets that are launching from only a limited number of places, and they'll be more expensive than the much more nimble and deployable space plane solution. And you think about with a space plane, any country that wants to be spacefaring, all they have to do is buy one of the planes, little service contract, and off they go. They have a space program. So I think that's also compelling for kind of spreading new space around the world. So in conclusion, this is a new paradigm that I'm suggesting for New Space 2.0 of using these smaller launch vehicles, ultimately space planes, getting right to the edge of space, then using plasma thrusters, solar electric propulsion, maybe eventually nuclear electric propulsion to take the payload from low Earth orbit to the last mile, whether that would be medium Earth orbit, geosynchronous orbit, the moon, Mars, wherever. Use the most advanced technology we have in space and use the most advanced technology we have on the ground instead of just using the most advanced ground technology we have everywhere. So the only question is who's going to lead this next phase in New Space 2.0. I certainly hope to be part of it. And for those of you that are interested, it's a very fertile field, and I hope you'll join me out there. Thank you. Time left? Yes. Okay.
What makes your space planes more efficient? What kind of technology are you using for like the engine thrust to move around?
Yeah, so what makes the space plane more efficient? So first of all, nothing's expendable, but you can build conventional rockets that fly back to launch pads as well. So reusability is key. The second thing that's differentiated that makes it more efficient than what's going on out there is it uses air breathing propulsion technology. So all the rockets today just push that air out of the way. It's a problem, but air is really rocket fuel. So instead of just pushing it out of the way, we should infuse it into the vehicle, use it for combustion, and that will enhance the propulsive efficiency of the vehicle. The third aspect of what makes the space plane more efficient is, it's eluding me right now. What was I thinking? So air breathing technology. Certainly we'll use like the most advanced material technologies that are out there. So when a rocket launches, that's it. It's on its own, right? You aren't giving it any more energy. Okay. What's unique about the ground launch mission is that you can couple energy to that vehicle during those early stages of it picking up velocity. If you look at Alpha, it burns about 25% of its propellant, of its first stage propellant, just to get going 200 miles per hour. Okay. 25% of that tank just to get going 200 miles per hour. We can get a rocket plane going 200 miles per hour with some sort of energy assistance devices on the ground, because it's on the ground and we can couple energy to it. Now, I've got some interesting ideas about how you can do that, and I'm sure you can think of some right away. But now I'm leaving the ground and I've gotten going 200 miles per hour and I've burned 0% of my propellant, which gives me an advantage over a vertical takeoff type of vehicle. So those are some ideas about how it can be more efficient.
We have an online question.
Yeah, let me just answer say one more thing about that, because I'm so passionate about the plane. The other thing is just the return. To return a conventional rocket, you have to propulsively land. So you have to save propellant, and you got to do some scary stuff right before you hit the runway. And you got people on this, maybe, for example, and it's like you're coming in screaming, and right before you hit the ground, stop perfectly, That's kind of, it could cause you to sweat a little bit, I think. So with the rocket plane, you can use, again, exploit the air and use it for aerodynamic drag. You have wings, you can do S-turns and things and slowly bleed off that energy and come in a very gentle, graceful gliding landing. You could even do fly-arounds if you have some turbojet part of this propulsion system, which is, I think, not only more efficient because you're not having to burn propellant, but I think it's a much less scary way to land your payload than just throwing on the brakes right before you hit the ground vertically. Okay, good.
Has the space tug tech with solar been deployed anywhere or proven? How does it work?
Yeah, so plasma propulsion is being widely used in communication satellites now. It's typically lower power levels, around 1 kilowatt or less. Ultimately, with the Space Tug, we'd want to go up to about 10 kilowatts. So you can actually cluster existing thrusters that are a ton of flight heritage, or build bigger thrusters. So that tech definitely already exists. And the solar panels have gotten more efficient, so you can really harvest a lot of solar power to drive those plasma SEP thruster devices. Eventually, you could use beamed power to power them, which is an interesting idea, where maybe you have a giant power plant in space that's collecting solar energy, and then all the satellites don't have to have any sort of energy generation. They just have a little microwave antenna on them, and this power station is just beaming power around to these satellites while they're doing their orbital maneuvers. That would be kind of a cool way to do it as well. And then there's nuclear ultimately as well. She's got the microphone.
You mentioned looking forward for new opportunities for new entrepreneurs. And so I wanted to ask a question. In this time where we're seeing the development of cheap transportation to space from launch providers, what new industries or technologies do you think low-cost launches are going to allow us to explore in space?
So communication is always the dominant moneymaker in space. So Starlink isn't up there because Elon loves satellites. Starlink is up there because it can generate the revenue that can ultimately be used to fund the Mars mission. So Wi-Fi from the sky is going to be huge. And I mean, even you just beyond just the profit part of it, look how it's impacted the war in Ukraine. You know, we've given the Ukrainians commercially capability to communicate and defend themselves, which is just pretty mind-boggling. Earth imaging is going to be another big one. So we'll have apps where, you know, you can get images from space, even real-time images from space for things that are going on. That has unlimited amounts of uses that you can think of. But the other thing is that will cause spin-offs of just pure software companies that are taking all this Earth imaging information, synthetic aperture radar information, and processing it and selling it. That'll be another big business on its own. And then, you know, understanding what's going on from space allows us to understand what's going on in our atmosphere. So that has huge implications for things like climate change and helping us to make sure we understand what, you know, what's going on with the climate. The whole cislunar space is wide open for business, and that's the Wild West. Nobody really understands what's going to happen with business between here and the moon. There's sample returns. If there's helium-3 on the moon, that's like a unlimited supply of fusion energy. So the business of mining it there and transporting it back to Earth could become a hugely profitable thing. Maybe taking water to the moon could be a hugely profitable thing if we have big human colonies there. Just on and on and on. No limit to business opportunities.
We have another online question.
Sure.
Regarding the space plane concept, Reaction Engines in the UK has invested heavily in this already. Can Firefly compete with their head start?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to say from the outset is that I said this is the IMO vision. In my opinion, Firefly is not formally working on a rocket plane right now. This is just my view of what needs to be done. There are lots of people. There's a healthy group of folks, domestic and internationally, that are talking about rocket planes. Skylon, the reaction engine one that you mentioned, is very conspicuous. In my opinion, it's just a government welfare project for this company. You know, the technology I don't think is feasible. So essentially what they try to do in that vehicle is they try to liquefy air, separate it out, nitrogen and everything else, take the oxygen out, and then burn it in a rocket engine. And all this is supposed to happen in a few milliseconds. And this is another, like, physics works in a vacuum thing. You can actually get all these super nanotube heat exchangers to do this separation in a laboratory environment. But when you're taking off from a runway, and it gets kind of wet in London sometimes, I think, and now you're freezing water on your your supercooled heat exchangers. Oh, and then a big bug comes and splat and covers up these parts. I personally don't think that that sort of technology is viable. I think there are much better ways to do it. And there are people in this country thinking about other ways to do this as well. But I just wanted to answer my view of Skylon is not very high.
I had one more question. So that you actually kind of answered it a little bit, but I wanted to say thank you very much. This was a very inspiring talk, super impressive. My question was about Firefly, if you were going all in on the space vehicle thing, or if you're going to dominate the alpha business, which sounds like.
Yeah, so Firefly is, as you know, you may not know, so I stepped down as the CEO in June, and we have a private equity company. I'm still an employee at Firefly, and I'm lead a lot of the technical things. But the guidance at Firefly now with this new ownership is to perfect alpha and fly, maybe up to 24 alphas a year, and then develop this new medium lift launch vehicle in cooperation with Northrop Grumman, and have the best small launcher in the world and have the best conventional medium lift launcher in the world, land on the moon with our lunar lander, and continue to develop this business and develop the space tug. We're also working on developing the space tug, which we call the space utility vehicle. So the space tug is definitely in the development path of Firefly, but the rocket plane is not on radars, except for maybe 5-10 years down the road.
What's your take on the nuclear propulsion devices? I think that would be a order of magnitude improvement.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen. It absolutely has to happen. If we want to get serious about going beyond Earth orbit, beyond near Earth activities, we have to have nuclear power in space. It's just a simple physics thing of energy density. So I think, periodically in the United States, every 20 years, we get serious about it, and I worked on it at NASA. I was very heavily involved in Prometheus program at the turn of the century. It sounds so weird. And then they canceled it and went to this SLS thing. And that was one of the reasons I was like, yo, I'm done at NASA. We're not going back to space shuttle, stacking our space shuttle Legos different ways. And so I went to SpaceX, but it'll come back around.
2 more questions. One online, any opinion on the feasibility of space elevators and their potential applications?
I don't know a lot about space elevators. I haven't studied it very much, but from what I have read about it, it's one of these technologies that requires, unobtainium like materials, like a single crystal structure tube that goes, hundreds of miles up or whatever. So it requires some really crazy advanced materials technology. So there are definitely technological barriers to making it happen that go way beyond any of the type of conventional rocket type technology that I've talked about so far. But having said that, like I said, I'm not an expert on it. I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand, but my gut feeling is it's highly unlikely.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So obviously there's no proof that this will actually be hit, but I think Starship was placed at $10 per kg. Now, as you mentioned, agility is a huge benefit of space planes over having just bigger and bigger rockets, which can only launch in certain areas. But I was curious if there are any other benefits you could think of if space planes don't end up being more cost effective than rockets. Sorry, that was a bit of a...
Yeah, I mean, a big part of transportation is not just how much it costs. It's going where you want to go. I bet a lot of y'all out there use Uber more than you use the city bus. City bus is a heck of a lot cheaper, but it's not leaving when you want to. It's not leaving from where you want to leave, and it's probably not going where you want to go. So cheaper and bigger is not always better. I mean, you look at just aircraft. In the A380, they're discontinuing that thing. It's, they built bigger and bigger commercial aircraft, but they reached a point where, oh no, actually 777 size is more optimal. So just bigger and bigger and bigger is not the answer. But to be very clear, my response to your question is where you're going and when you're going commands a premium that people will pay, even if there's technically a lower cost ride to get to space. If you end up in the wrong orbit and you have a very specific orbit you need, it's it doesn't help you.
We have any other questions? Yes, one more. And one online and then
Yeah.
Quickly regarding rocket propulsion, do you think that other types of fuel will be used in the future? What do you think will be the next big step in propulsion?
Mike, there we go. I think the in-space tugs are going to see more development in propellant types than maybe the ground-based stuff will. These plasma thrusters that I talk about, I think one of the most exciting developments for those are the use of metallic propellants. Right now, they use noble gases that are very rare and very expensive and difficult to store. Some of the most exciting research I see is using things like bismuth and lithium as propellants for these plasma thruster systems. As far as the launch vehicles go, we're going to see a lot of the methane fueled rockets begin to fly. No one's gone to orbit on methane before, but you're going to see that with Relativity is going to try, SpaceX certainly with Starship, Blue Origin, there's this huge push toward methane. So that's a big deal. That's something that's going on right now. But you know, chemistry is chemistry, and people have been looking at how to synthesize different chemicals for many years. But when it comes down to it, really the best propellant to get from Earth, at least the first stage, is liquid oxygen and kerosene. It actually has incredible energy density, and it's hard to beat. And so I think we'll continue to use those conventional propellants. But the methane stuff is interesting to see that evolve. Yeah.
Hi. So I actually had a question. So if reusability is like the holy grail for lowering costs, why aren't Firefly's current vehicles reusable, Alpha and MLV and Beta in the past?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the rocket plane is the holy grail. Let's all be clear. Just kidding. Reusability is super important, but we need to do more than that. And so with Firefly, you see, like, I was like fighting for my life for years. So you need to get to space and prove that you can get to space first. There are a lot of people that talk about getting to space, very few companies that do that. You need to get into that elite crowd as soon as you can. And building a reusable vehicle adds technology risk that is not going to pay dividends. It may actually jeopardize your whole enterprise. Is why you're working on that and breaking that, you might run out of money. We decided to get to space first and then infuse reusability. So Beta is designed to be reusable. And just you look at SpaceX, same thing. Falcon was expendable, Falcon 9 was expendable, and then the reusable Falcon 9 came later. So it's a natural evolution in managing risk and cost of a space company is to start with a expendable platform.
All right. Well, thanks, Tom, for that great talk.